interesting panel for, this is the vision thing on space. We just had a chat about K-12 education and growing a new generation of space enthusiasts, and also the issues art and science mingled in technology. This one, our official mission is space educators from space scientists to creative visionaries, emphasis on the last two words. We're going to talk to a bunch of creative visionaries. Dr. Fiorella Terenzi has been a regular with Digital Hollywood. She is a musician and an author and an astrophysicist, relevantly. And in a moment, you will tell us a little bit about your background. Mark Zicray, you know, we talk about Trekkies, and where did they come from? Somebody has to write the Trek episodes, that dude. And Nagin is Tactical Mission Lead. I love this. Tactical Mission Lead for the Curiosity rover. You've seen its work. She's how come it works. Not alone, but she's a key part of it. And Rod has a magazine right here, Ad Astra, for the National Space Society. That he is the
free copies. So everybody wants to.
He's written 17 books on space, including the guy who's lifting Space 2.0. Where's Space 2.0?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, shows people.
Paying attention.
A hungry crowd. And
leave reviews.
and you know, I pointed out before, knows everybody in, as it were, space in the business. And so he has a truly galactic, as it were, perspective on what we're about to talk about. And Susan Carlin is a journalist and both an art and science enthusiast. That's crazy. You got dang. Susan knows everybody. And my name is Marty Perlmutter, and that's all you need to know about me. Well, we've been imagining on the screen space since there was motion picture for 120 years. Because I think it's the end of the 19th century. That funky thing that we all remember.
1896, George Williams.
There it is.
Yeah.
So the image of this what looked like a bullet splatting into the moon. And then 73 years later, just a tad older than me, we actually went there. And since then, we've turned primarily to robotic exploration, not only of the planets, but you know, of asteroids, and we have gone well beyond the outer rim of our planets in our exploration, with data being fed back as we speak. By the way, at the Huntington Library in Garden, there is a marvelous, you know this, by the way, my science and art people here, you know the exhibit at the Huntington Gallery, at the Huntington Library?
Talking about the JPL snail show up there?
Yeah, there's a beautiful sort of little piece of metal. Look at it and notice what it is. The perforations in it represent motions through the space, through space. Motions of stars, planets as you look up into the sky. And if you stand inside, every once in a while they do a VR display in there, but that's not what you go for. It's just there are speakers, and they're grabbing data that's pouring down from space at that moment and turning it into audible frequencies. The point being, as McLuhan pointed out in 1968 in Understanding Media, that the Earth is now inside an information network. And that not only do we sense everything that's happening on every point of the planet, but we are being sensed. So let's hear from our panel. We'll start with you, madam, Ms. Terenzi. Please tell us about you, and let's do like a minute and a half intro of who we are, and then we'll kick around some ideas, and then we'll open it up to you, because I'm sure you got questions.
My name is Fiorella Terenzi. As you can imagine, I was born in Milan, Italy. I had this passion for the night sky, spending the summer outside Milan with my grandmother. She used the fantasy imagination to create fable storytelling. Later on, growing up in Milan, I was a student of music and the arts, modeling, and I always loved astronomy. So I pursued my career both in music and in astronomy. I was able to complete, however, only astronomy. When I was working on my dissertation, I found a new way to decode radio waves from galaxies into sound. So I created, way back in 1987, a new branch in astronomy called acoustic astronomy, where basically you can listen to the sound of space to research them for chemical, dynamical, and physical property. And after that, I got a recording contract with Island Record. I did many collaborations, Thomas Dolby, Timothy Leary, just to name a few. I wrote books, so I became, like Time Magazine says, a cross between Carl Sagan and Madonna.
Oh, I love it. That's great. That's great. That's beautiful. Cool, Mark.
Well, I'm Mark Zicree, and I grew up, fortunately, in the 60s, which was a great era both for space exploration and science fiction. So the 3 TV shows that made me want to be a writer were Star Trek, Outer Limits, and the original Twilight Zone. And during the same period, of course, we had Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo. And so I was very cognizant of how the science fiction writers were basically proselytizing for a shared universe vision of the future in which we land on the moon, land on Mars, you know, and then out into the far reaches of the solar system and beyond. And so it was Ray Bradbury, Robert Heinlein, Arthur C. Clarke, Isaac Asimov, in collaboration with the space scientists like, you know, Wernher von Braun, etc. And so, yes, there's lots to talk about. That then spurred me to become a writer, and I've written for many of the science fiction shows since. And I'm currently, among many other projects, shooting a project called Space Command, where my audience gave me over $1 million to shoot the pilot of the show. And so I have my own studio now and can basically write anything I want to, but that's a hopeful vision of the future that includes manned space exploration and colonization.
Wonderful. Nagin.
So I'm Nikki Cox, and I'm an engineer at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and I've wanted to work at JPL since I was 14 on robotic space exploration, and similar to Mark, one of the reasons for that was seeing shows like Star Trek, the original series, that showed a hopeful vision of the future. I grew up in an ethnic environment in which I was born in India and grew up in Kansas City. And the environment I was in was one where in my home, there seemed to be a very strong difference between what was expected of the girls in the family and what was expected of the boys. I grew up in a Muslim household. And, you know, that didn't make any sense to me, but it rapidly brought home to me that we find ways to divide ourselves. So I learned very young that we find ways to separate ourselves by gender and, of course, by other ways. And in that environment, I suddenly saw through Star Trek and through the Apollo missions that were happening that there were things going on that brought people together. I remember seeing how the Apollo missions, people would crowd around their television sets, and then on the show Star Trek, it showed people of all kinds of backgrounds, including women who are part of the bridge crew, and so for me, you know how melodramatic teenagers are, I decided that I wanted to do something for all humankind, and that was going to be working for NASA if I could find a way to do that. But for me, as I got older, the astronauts remained and are currently in Earth orbit. So through Carl Sagan's series Cosmos, I learned about the work that was happening at JPL and the robotic exploration. And so the fact that we send robots before we send people. And so I said, oh, I want to see these images of places that have never been seen before. So I went to, because again, the resources in my family were directed towards the boys for education, I was able to get an Air Force scholarship and go to Cornell University, because you know, at the end of Cosmos, it said, Carl Sagan, Cornell University. And so I'm going to go to Cornell University. And so I did in fact go to Cornell, I got a degree in engineering and a degree in psychology, went into the Air Force, got a background in space operations that I was able to use to apply to JPL. I've been there for 20 years. Every day was as much fun as the first, and I've worked on missions of exploration to Mars, to Jupiter, extrasolar missions like Kepler that have told us there are planets around other stars. But I want to close by saying that there is such a connection between entertainment, between the media, and the inspiration that it gives for scientists and engineers. There's an exhibit at the Smithsonian that is, I believe, a permanent exhibit to Star Trek because of the amount of scientists and engineers that were inspired. And around me, the people that I work with, everyone was affected either by Star Trek or Star Wars or other shows like that. But the generation, the folks that are a little bit older than myself, when I got to JPL, they were inspired by the Chelsea Bonestone paintings. The paintings that showed what, what could be like on Mars. And so there's this thread through JPL and other NASA centers of what first fired our imaginations. And in so many cases, it's books, it's entertainment, it's things that we saw that made us want to be a part of it. And so I'm lucky to work at JPL, and I also feel privileged to be here today to say thank you for the
I would like
inspiration.
to add about Star Trek at the Florida International University in Miami, where I teach astronomy and physics. Professor Dr. Webb was able to raise funding to create the Stoker Astro Science Center. Our donor was Stoker. And Dr. Webb is a huge fan of Star Trek. So he was able to replicate the holodeck, the chair, but it's a real spaceship. We remote the telescope in the Tenerife, Latin America, Cerro Tololo, Quebec, from this Star Trek is a spaceship, and our student loves it. So thanks to the imagination of a writer and producer that we have this Stoker as a center.
Well, and also when you were mentioning Star Trek, when I was 10, I met Nichelle Nichols when Star Trek was on the air, and she was so encouraging. And we just shot a scene in Space Command with Nichelle Nichols, and so it comes full circle. But and also with the images that came from JPL and the images from Viking and Voyager and onward, those come back to us as writers, and they then fire our imaginations as we see how amazing the solar system is.
This is the way the brain works, the human brain.
Right. And,
Susan.
in fact, and I was just going to say, just to piggyback on that, is that I now work with one of the Gentry Lee produced Cosmos with Carl Sagan, and I now work with him at JPL. So lots of circles like that.
And I do have a question, if I may. I mean, with all this amazing space we have, great talent, how come we still have actors that go on a talk show and they flaunt they're not good at math?
Well,
And they're proud to say that to our young brain. How come?
well, it's American in most other things. It's just, stupid is cool. And we see lots of evidence. And now we put it in the White House. Please, Susan.
So I write about the nexus of science, technology, and arts, primarily for Best Company, but I've also written for IEEE Spectrum, New York Times, Scientific American, Discover, for just Newsweek, and NPO. And I traveled to every continent, reported from every continent, from almost every continent, but gotten sick on every continent. And I've always, my science background, I grew up in a medical family. My dad's a doctor. I was pre-med in college, and fell in love with journalism, and have reported on many different. I've never been on a panel where I've had a meal on the panel.
I can't believe I missed it.
Do you want a sandwich?
No.
I'm desperately afraid that someone's going to ask me a question and I'll have just taken a bite of sandwich. So I was, it came out to, LA, and I did a lot of reporting in the entertainment industry, but then I got really bored and sort of began drifting over to more science. But because I did both. I did both sciences and arts. I was always trying to find ways to combine them in journalism. And luckily those two worlds have gotten closer and closer together. So it's actually, I'm now coming up with stories that encompass both areas. And JPL is kind of a hotbed. NASA and space science and JPL. They have so many of that kind of cross-pollination going on. When I was at Fast Company, when I first started at Fast Company, I was writing for a section called Co-Create, which doesn't exist anymore, and it was all about the creative process, and they were thinking about it as an entertainment section. And I said, no, there's a ton of creative process going on in science, which enabled me to go report on JPL. So, so that kind of got me into writing more about space science. I don't know, was there anything else I'm supposed to?
No, that was good.
All right, onward to you, Ron.
Great, Rod Powell, you.
Hi, I'm Powell. I edit at Astro Magazine. I've written 17 space books.
Let me hold it up so that
You
we
do
can
the
all,
man away.
I'll be, yeah.
Ben away.
Go ahead,
And,
go ahead.
And I write, up till this year, I've written a book every year for Jeff Polson Laboratory called, with the whimsical name of Technical Highlights 2017. But it's cool because you get to sit down with 30 scientists and say, okay guys, digest your life's work into 500 words. And you can't use the dry marker. That's when they start shaking and sweating. So I grew up during the space age, which was very inspiring to me. I grew up in Pasadena, just up the street. So JPL was over there and Caltech was over there. And I later found out the Soviet H-bomb map blast zones overlapped over my house. So that was my distinct relationship with those guys. So I wanted to work in space sciences until...
That explains a great many things.
Until I went to UCLA and had a part of the way the differential equations, and that's when I wasn't an astronomy major anymore. So I went to a variety of colleges, ended up at Stanford majoring in communications, and then got interested, unfortunately, in television commercials for a number of years. But since then, got into documentary filmmaking, worked a couple of years, actually about 7 years in visual effects on Deep Space Nine and Battlestar Galactica. So every time Mark wrote some scene with 30 spaceships in it, struggling out of battle, because Space War actually got the highest ratings, regardless of what Gene Roddenberry thought, sadly. We'd have to figure out a way to get 30 spaceships in the shot, and more than once we made a trip down to the Hallmark store and bought those little ornaments. So yeah, secret of Deep Space Nine. Anyway, went on to work in documentaries for a number of years. My favorites, of course, were the space documentaries, but about 2005, 2006, Honey Boo Boo, if anybody remembers that.
Oh, yeah.
There's the unraveling of nonfiction television, so a lot of us left, and that's what got me the book writing.
Did you meet Honey Boo Boo?
No, but I saw the demo reel when it was revolting. The last show I was offered to work on as a producer was Vegas Jail, which was 7 days on, 2 off, 14-hour days, watching prisoners get their faces kicked in. So I thought, no.
I don't know why you wanted to leave television.
Yeah. Well, so the fastest way to go from a six-digit television salary to a 5-digit salary is to become a book author in LA. In case anybody's interested in what it's like to write books, if you talk to the Authors Guild about their most recent survey, the average author of nonfiction, multi-titled author of nonfiction books working full-time makes per year
60.
$9,300 full-time. So that's why we edit magazines and do other things.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy to be here, and I hope you ask lots of really cool questions.
So now let's talk about the vision thing. You know, what, imagine, if you will, what in art and science and across our we're going to do, both to convey the magic and the wonder, and to kindle more imagination and more wonder. So please, Johnson.
My interest is about combining reason and imagination. So both as a recording artist and also as an astrophysicist. Right now, in 2019 or 2020, keeping the attention of a 600 student, that's the average per semester, it's very difficult. So there is a very short attention span. So I found a way to combine creative design, storytelling, performance art with traditional science education. And I give you an example. I'm at the 3rd experiment. Instead of teaching Astronomy 101, I decided to rename it, Let's Get Astrophysical. Change of energy when they come to class. They're already prepping up, already excited. And indeed, during astronomy, we cover everything, right? Solar system, galaxy, black hole, cosmology. But what we do with astronomy, is to write a space opera. So my student, there is nothing doing wrong, they can experiment, I mean everything is right. They're gonna write a space opera, they're gonna create a script, a storyline. If you wanna act, you can play music, you can do the light, you do the costume, and everything has to be in the context of astronomy. On top of that, at the end of the semester, as a final test, we have a public performance in front of an audience, in a bandshell, in a theater, or a festival, art festival. And Let's Get Astrophysical has proved to be successful. Students who walk to class, they don't call it anymore education, they call it engagement. That's why at FIU, where I teach, we want to change the title of College of Art, Science and Education to College of Art, Science and Engagement.
Okay.
Because right now the word education is creating kind of let down. Instead, we want to keep the enthusiasm of student. So I do believe that in the academia we are moving into a different domain that combines storytelling, creative design, architecture, virtual reality, augmented reality, and anything that really can relate to this young, vibrant mind. Because that's when we are successful as a teacher, as a professor, where we can ignite and keep that flame working in the soul, in the heart of our student. And this is forming new citizens also for this planet.
That's wonderful. That's great. Spot on. That's great.
I want to know where she was when I was flunking astronomy. All they cared about was numbers.
Organic chemistry. Oh, they saved me.
Well, she was young.
That's the thing that when I was studying various sciences, it was all rote memorization.
Yeah.
And you know, the thing that would carry you through the classes is that you were thinking of either an end goal for it, or you were thinking of, you know, or maybe you just had a love of that subject. But just day in, day out, just to memorize something gets really boring. And if you can teach and attach it to a story or a narrative or a context or a reason why you need this information, then all of a sudden you're seeing, you begin to see that subject, that class in a greater context, and it takes on more resonance and more meaning.
Yeah.
So I liken it to studying a language where you're memorizing words versus having a conversation in that language. I think schools are starting to understand that they need to teach this way to better engage students, but it's very slow. It's very slow. It's still, I mean, there's still a lot of work to be done in that area.
Well, just in terms of terminology, you know, amongst educational theorists, that word, you're right, is loaded, freighted negatively. In education theory, the really cool people, constructivist learning folk, never use the word teach. You know, because teach, I mean, we all are close enough, you know, plus or minus 20 years in age to remember, you know, teaching is pouring the teacup of knowledge into the head of the child. That's teaching. And learning, the root source of education is the word educare, to educe, to bring forth, to bring out. And the whole business of engagement, and which is key, and intellectual engagement in constructing knowledge. This is what's happening in education theory these days. The teachers, most of them, if they're over the age of 35, have had zero experience, you know, at doing that. And many of you who, and some are here, you know, come from K-12 classrooms, you know, you got to be a magician to pull that stuff off and keep order and make it work.
Yeah, but it's also fun because, you know, we all of us were talking about how we were inspired by Star Trek and so forth, and the reason it inspired us is it said that we can be more, we can be better, we can, you know, I mean, we're the only animal that looked up at the sky and said, I wonder what that is, I'm going to go find out.
Well, I don't think that's true. I mean, I think that whales, when they surface, look up at the sky, and I know I know that elephants, when they look up in the sky, and orangutans.
Yeah, well, but
They have
you're not
thoughts.
going to invite them to Thanksgiving. So the point is that I'm fortunate to work in a medium where I'm able to reach millions of people. And the new technologies, I have my own YouTube channel called Mr. Sci-Fi, where I have millions of hits, and I can reach out to my audience and they finance me. And I'm still forming affiliations with the networks and the VOD platforms, but I'm able to inspire and entertain. And I think, for instance, with Space Command, it's a hopeful vision of the future, just like Star Trek was, and I wanted to create something that said, we can go out into space, we can reach across boundaries and barriers with compassion. For me, I think compassion is vital and vision is vital. And as I just wrote a pilot for the CW based on a pitch by a friend of mine. We're talking last week, and the main character is a prodigy, and he's in his early 20s, and he's a quantum physicist, a practical magician like Penn and Teller, a YouTube star, and etc. And so, and a political activist. And so the fun part of that was taking all of these things that I'm fascinated by and weaving them together to show that they are not different things, that they're all the same, and to draw the parallels, the metaphors of quantum entanglement and so forth, and draw that into the human sphere. Because the moment you can get someone interested and excited, I think space exploration is vital to the survival of our species, but also to the survival of our best selves. Because we're the most curious creatures, and both our curiosity, we have a great capacity for violence and destruction, but also we have a great capacity for love and knowledge and gaining knowledge. And I think Elon Musk is very much on the right track. And I think what you've been doing at JPL is, of course, on the side of the angels. Anytime you see a photo of the outer planets, or I'm dying to find out, which of the exoplanets have, a breathable atmosphere, all of that stuff. And
Working on it.
yeah,
When the wave goes up, we're going to see a lot of that.
But I read science voraciously, and particularly astronomy and physics, and then I share that by creating stories that excite people. And the more they're excited, and the less they're made. Politics, all these other realms can make people smaller and more fearful. I think the sciences, particularly space exploration, can make them larger and open their hearts, which is vital.
Well said. That's great. Right.
So, I think what we're talking about here is kind of a common thing, which is telling better stories. There's anything, you can wrap a story around anything, as Honeycomb would prove. But if you're talking about, it's amazing to me how often the story of space exploration, both robotic and human, is not told well. It's one of the greatest adventure stories of the 20th century, now coming into the 21st century. And I think we can all do it better as journalists, we can do it as fiction writers, you can do it better as teachers and citizens. One of the hardest things, I do a lot of radio, so much to my shame, a couple times a year I'm on Coast to Coast AM. I always get interested. It amazes me after I do one of those, how many emails I get from friends in junior high that are generals in the Air Force or something saying, hey, I heard you're on Coast to Coast. I said, you'll admit that? But there's so many people are enraptured by this idea of we didn't go to the moon, or conspiracies about aliens landing on Earth and so forth. And part of that's because we don't tell the story of true science and true exploration and true discovery well enough. If you really explicate that in a way, I said this in the last panel, so sorry if it's a repeat for some of you, but if you talk to people's hearts instead of their minds, speak to their emotions, speak to the graces within them, they will be all over this because it's a great story. It's exciting. You look at pictures from the Hubble telescope, which is the gift that keeps giving for NASA for the last 20 plus years, and those are some of the most staggering visuals of the last 20, 25 years. They're unbelievable. As pointed out, when Webb goes up, assuming everything works as planned, it's got a lot of unfolding to do, we'll get even more incredible visuals, and we'll be able to see the very edge of the universe and finally begin to really get a handle on what exoplanets are all about, what their atmospheres are about. Eventually, we'll begin to start imaging them directly, which is pretty sensational. And for instance, does everybody here know that NASA's talking about an interstellar probe now? It's one of the best kept quiet news stories of the last 10 years.
And why is that? Why is that, Bud?
Well, I think it's a hard sell. I work on the board of a group called Tau Zero Foundation, and they're all about interstellar exploration. And when you talk to people about this, they're like, well, A, it's 30 years out there, and B, why should I care? That's not going to happen in my lifetime. Now, it might. There's things like the Breakthrough Initiative with Yuri Milner and his billions who who said, okay, we're going to build potato chip-sized spacecraft, send them on laser beams, and they'll get there within your lifetime. Maybe not in my lifetime, but certainly within most of yours. And we'll start to get images back from exoplanets around other stars. But it's a hard sell because it's way far away and it doesn't affect us directly. But there are other stories like, why is China heading to the South Pole of the Moon? Because there's water there. Why are we interested in perhaps
What kind of water?
fresh water as ice?
Sparkling.
Positive economics.
And deuterium?
Have you probably, but the point is, the water itself is enough because we spend about $8,000 a pound, excuse me, per gallon to lift water off of Earth for astronauts to drink and get out of themselves and recycle and drink again, you know? It's really expensive to launch water, but if you've got it out there, once you get off Earth, you're halfway to anywhere, as has been famously said by a number of writers, because you can make it into breathable oxygen, drinkable water, rocket fuel, there's aluminum up there, there's glass, you can do all kinds of things on the moon. That's a pretty sexy story.
Wait,
But we don't tell
I got a great idea. We have 5 people here who are competent in science, seriously competent in science. So let's talk about the low-hanging fruit, all right, or even the 30-year stuff. Let's talk about the big science stuff, right? Let's talk about big science, big science.
Okay.
All right, so we're still basically, we're the $8,000 a gallon is more than that, it's $10,000 a pound, and, you know, but, maybe SpaceX will drop it to $5K a pound. I mean, that's a lot of money to send marbles up into space, or you know, guitars to entertain people on the ISS. We're still stuck in Newtonian physics in terms of this stuff. We really are. So let's go way blue sky for just a couple of minutes. Let's talk about mastery of gravity.
Well, how about we go a step beyond that and talk about what it really means to travel in space? Once you can give me true telepresence, now there'll always be a time delay until we figure out quantum entanglement communication or something, which is doubtful, but assuming you can give me a true telepresence experience on Mars, where I'm actually feeling things and smelling things, and hopefully this is, sent right into my brain, not to repair crummy VR goggles. Do I really have to go there? Do people have to go there? If we do have to go there, and if we continue going out to these places, I personally suggest, and it would cure my dieting ills to do so, you just take my consciousness and transplant it into a robotic cockroach. They're strong, they can survive anything, they don't care about radiation. Send it out to Neptune, where Tommy Lee Jones made that hideous movie Ad Astra, and I won't have daddy issues out there, I'll have a good time, because I'll be a little robotic cockroach.
So what do you think about that, Nikki? You're building launching robots and operating in space. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so let me just add a couple of things to what I've been hearing. So in terms of being interstellar, we already are in that Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 are now outside.
But they're pooping along at VW speed. I mean, what are they doing, 30,000 miles an hour, maybe, at this point?
So we were talking, just to finish on what we were talking about in terms of the ability to fire up, hearts as well as minds. When I started doing kind of on my own time some public speaking about because I figured if the taxpayers are paying for the missions that I'm working on, then I should spend some of my time telling them about what those missions are doing. And my journey of learning how to story tell, because I'm an engineer, right? Was one of which where I said, wait a second, I remember the first slide package I got, and it started from JPL, and it started with a picture of the spacecraft, and I went out and I was like, wait a minute, nobody understood where I started, and then I realized they didn't know much about JPL, and then they didn't know much about NASA, and I gradually realized that I had to start talking about all those things because they needed context. People often don't know that these robotic missions have a team of people behind them. And if you're going to engage people's hearts, then you have to tell them about the people. And now, when I have the time, I do some lectures for the U.S. State Department internationally. And what I found is that this is not, as Rod was saying, this is not a hard sell when you share the excitement, of exploration and discovery.
Yes.
And what I gradually realized is there's one of these videos of us jumping up and down when, I was fortunate enough to be in the control room when Curiosity landed. And the funny thing is we all said we were going to stay in our seats and clap politely and we're like the JSC astronauts and the JSC mission control and be more professional, but Californians, that's not what happened. We again have another video of us jumping up and down, and that's actually the one I show first. No matter where I'm speaking in the world, I learned that if I show that video first, the entire energy in the room changes, no matter what audience that I'm speaking to, because they're like, oh wow, this is not what I thought engineers and scientists do. This is not what I thought of when I thought of, even if I knew what robotic spacecraft were. People have a perception of what science and math are, and then to see a group of people jumping up and down shows the difference of what engineering and science is, but it also shows that these missions are our robotic emissaries. That when these rovers land on Mars, it doesn't feel like a robotic mission to those of us who are in the room, and hopefully to those who are also watching. It feels like we are there, like we are seeing Mars with our own eyes, and they are, and when they see that video, when I later then say, these spacecraft feel like our children. We spend decades, most of us have spent 10 years working on a particular mission, and then when it lands, they are our eyes and ears, and they represent us. And when Rod was talking about telepresence, one of the things I enjoy most is when I'm, like on Friday, tomorrow, I'm on shift for Curiosity, and one of the first things I'll do is walk, before the shift starts, is I'll walk down there and put on a VR headset for on-site, and it's certainly not what we eventually hope it is, but it feels like I'm standing on Mars because it's the Curiosity data that is being loaded into the system. And one part of me is like, oh, what are we going to do tomorrow? I should be prepared for my shift. And the other part of me is like, oh my gosh, it's like I'm standing on Mars and this is data we took, and the wonder never goes away.
Yeah.
So of course, when we talk about what the future holds, how feasible is it to do interstellar probes and what distant science might be like, I just wanted to, for a moment, go back to this idea of hearts and minds, and so much as that is just showing them that you're people and that you're excited about the mission, and that it isn't just a job.
To me, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, please.
I hear you. I love JPL. I always show video, but the core is that the scientist stereotype has to be changed.
I was going to say that.
So shout out to Gina Davis, for the first time is giving space to women scientists. We really don't look like Albert Einstein.
No.
I wasn't inspired by Star Trek. I was inspired by the first female astrophysicist I saw. Was interpreted by Kenny McGillis in Top Gun. Do you remember?
Yes, sir.
Super sexy, super beautiful. So we need to change the stereotype, and also you need to accept that the scientists also have a different accent, even if we are American. And scientists with an accent like me, and they have a Nobel Prize, we also deserve to go on the media.
Yes.
We don't have any space to come out on CNN to do any commentary because of our accent. We exist. We are scientists, Nobel Prize, American, from India, Pakistan heritage, Italian heritage. No one ever portrays us on History Channel, on CNN. We are kept to the side. Is this the scientific community we want to build? A stereotype like Albert Einstein and scientists like me, and people are applauding. Stand up if you agree with me. Right? Accent, freedom from accent. No more network TV that everybody has to have a British accent or American accent. What am I, a second citizen because I have Italian heritage, or I speak with Italian accent? Things has to change, and it started from Hollywood.
Yes. Well,
it started from you guys.
Yeah. And but I want
It's
to jump
time
in. Yeah.
from changing the scientist stereotype.
I agree.
Freedom.
Yes, I agree absolutely, and that's why, for instance, in Space Command, Mira Furlan.
Thank you. by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, finally.
Yes, but
No
again,
more.
but I agree that we as fictional television writers and film writers have to present the what we see in reality, in life. And so, for instance, in Space Command, one of my first priorities was, as Mira Furlan, with whom I worked on Babylon 5, I wrote her as a character. She's a xenoarchaeologist, and she's been very enthusiastic about exploration and discovery. She has a daughter.
Hopefully she has a Mexican accent.
Well, she has a Serbian accent because she's from the former Yugoslavia, and when she's with her daughter, they're speaking Serbo-Croatian, and when she's with other people, she's speaking English.
Probably she has to be only on those role, or those accent role. So
Yes.
you are again keeping an actor acting in that accent.
Yes.
What I'm saying is a freedom. Please, humanity, accept us.
Yes.
I'm American. There are thousands of out there like me.
Tens of
So-
thousands, hundreds of thousands.
But then
Insights.
so my strong priority as a writer and now showrunner is to, and I write and direct and produce with my wife, and she keeps my feet on the ground also, but it's to create roles for women, to create roles that are more in line with what I see in the real world. And the one thing I'll say that Hollywood gets so wrong so often is the scientists and even the astronauts they present are often cynical, very downbeat. They're not enthusiastic. And when I mean particularly space scientists and astronauts, they're hugely enthusiastic about what they're doing. It's the thrill of exploration and discovery, and that needs to be presented. That's why I liked the film The Martian, because again, it presented the world that I see and know, so yeah, and it was funny as well. So,
And they didn't have aliens.
no, exactly.
One of the things that I like to try to do when I'm doing a science story is, Fast Company used to have slideshows, and I would often do the science portion in the story, but then I'd have a slideshow and I would take pictures of the scientists as they're going through the mission, and to sort of show the humanity and interaction, to show that it wasn't just numbers, that there were people behind these missions. Now they don't do the slideshows anymore, so I'll try to infuse some interesting, quirky aspect about them. For example, there was a scientist at JPL who I interviewed who had, I forgot his name, you might know who he is. He has the entire solar system tattooed on one arm with the places of like where the planets were when he was born. And it goes up the entire arm. And I wonder if it was, he was working on the InSight mission on the drilling.
Yeah. Oh wait, I know who that.
Yes, and I
That's
forgot
Troy.
his.
I bet that's Troy.
Okay,
Yes.
so, and he's like really cut, and like he's a really good looking guy with the thing, he looks like a biker, and he's a scientist, and,
Yeah.
and, I made sure to like have a picture of him showing his arm in the story and have a little bit about that in the story. It had nothing to do with the science he was working on, but it showed him in a completely atypical, like it showed him in a light that you wouldn't think of a scientist to be in.
Playing against type. But if we consider this though, in terms of looking ahead, we speak of the human, touch throughout this. And in terms of storytelling, I give it to you for sure. But what about the fact that an AI, in certainly less than 15 years, is going to be doing most of the data sorting, and in fact most of the data probing, and doing a lot of what we think of as the original human, creative, conceptual stuff in science, in the exploration of the data that's going to be coming from the next generation of what Nagin's people are working on. It's not going to be a bunch of humans poring over spreadsheets. It's not, because that stuff is too slow. And it cannot begin to comprehend the fact that we all know every 2 years we double the amount of information we've got. I've been processing the stuff that we're getting now. She's looking at the stuff that she's looking at. But there's stuff pouring down right this second from space that we have no way of looking at. Because we're just too damn slow to meet, quick as it is. It's too slow.
It'll be a while before the computers have the hearts to appreciate it.
The hearts, right? No. I once
But I know what
joked.
you're saying.
I once joked to Dr. Tuzos at MIT, one of the inventors of computing science, as we think of it. I said, I'm not going to care about programming a computer until I can make it cry. And he just made him laugh. But that won't be so funny in
Seemed
30
funny,
years.
isn't it?
That won't be funny in 30 years. You know, they may indeed make us cry in less than 30 years. But
I mean, it's absolutely true that the robotic spacecraft are returning just huge treasure troves of data that it takes humans a great deal of time to go through. And so having autonomous help, having help that can autonomously look through the data, is not something that is unwelcome. We want the human brains to be available for the creative part, the interpreting what we're seeing, the drawing the conclusions, but in terms of processing through the information. I actually was in Italy just last month visiting Mauro Tambelli, who is a astronomer there who has discovered many asteroids, and I was there thanking her because she'd actually named one for me. But one of the things she talked about was how hard it is to process the data. How it used to be very, very manual, that she would look at the slides looking for the asteroids, and now how so much of that is automatic. We do have huge amounts of data. One of the ways that until the AI is available to help us process that is so much more citizen science, right? Kepler made so much of their data available so that any interested scientist could, not scientist, any interested citizen could help go through the data. So that's a current way of trying to say, look at all the information we have and how can we process that? And that's by engaging more than the planetary science community, more than scientists and engineers. But it certainly is a good thing that we can look to algorithms to help go through the process, the initial sorting and filtering process of all the data we're sending back. Because as Rod said, our ability to send back data currently is outstripping our ability to understand it and see what discoveries might be.
how many minutes old is your data?
Medicine
When
is
you put the helmet on, when you put the viewer on, how many minutes has that information been traveling from Mars?
So that's how far it is.
17 minutes?
10 to 20, right?
It's the one-way light time in Mars varies between 5 to 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Right now, I think.
Depending on local processing.
So, but conversely to her point, you sit down, I spent a year with the Curiosity team working on a book about that. So I spent a lot of time with the planetary geologist team, guys like John Dotzinger, who's in charge of that part of it. And they're staring at these monitors, just willing more information to come through, because any one of them will tell you, and many have gone on public record saying so, they could do in a couple of days what it takes the rover 6 months to do. Humans are fast. Humans can make abstract conclusions. Humans can do a lot of things. Now again, when you got true telepresence, it'll be a different story. But for now, there still is a role for so-called boots on the ground in a lot of these situations. That said, when this organization is all about human settlement of the solar system, I follow that sentiment to an extent, but I think the machines will always go first. They'll go where it's dangerous, they'll go where it's scary, they'll go where it's hostile to us, and they're really good at it. When you talk about orbiting Jupiter, where you're going to get your gonads cooked in about 30 seconds because of the radiation environment, send a machine. And even at that, by the way, the chips on those things, which are old power PC chips, are baseline in about year 2000 because they cost $500,000 a piece. That's what it takes to radiation harden these things for the military, and then NASA buys them for $500,000 and off they go. So it's going to be a while before people do that, but I think we're still.
But you're touching on something very interesting, which is now manned exploration of space is heating up again, thank God. Because if we'd chosen the Mars mission that Von Braun wanted to build the space shuttle, we would have been on Mars in the 70s.
Well, 70 men would have been on Mars. That was his idea.
Yeah.
They'd be dead.
But now, of course, what Elon Musk is doing, and I hope Elon Musk beats the Chinese to Mars. That's which is personal preference.
He wouldn't
But I
bet
think
on
he's
it.
really serious about it.
They got more money than he does.
Well, at this point, he's gonna have to try
provide
to beat him to
also
the
a
moon
different point of
first.
view.
Okay, yeah, one more point of
I
view,
want
and
to
then
provide
five minutes of questions.
a point of view from an astrophysicist and cosmology point of view. What it comes down to regarding space exploration, STEM in space, it's really where are we going as a humanity. First, we have one home, is a planet Earth. All we have, history, music, fantasy books, is on this planet. So we need to find another home in space. Willing or unwilling, we are going to face losing the moon. So the keel of Earth will change it. We are going to be on a collision course with the Andromeda galaxy, with another galaxy. We are going to have our sun becoming a giant. So where are we going with humanity? Are we trying to become a digital human being where our expression will only live in the internet, in the digital being? Or are we seeking a matter manifestation, traveling through the solar system, who knows where, to another dimension? This is my cosmic point of view. So where are we going? That's I would like to have a couple of point of view. I mean, that's what I ask myself. I love curiosity, but where are we going? Voyager 1, Voyager, what's the end goal?
Yes.
Well, before we
Survival?
go, you know, I mean,
Colonization of space?
one of my favorite
Creating a
slogans,
human being on Mars?
clean up your room and then you go
Fighting
outside.
for life on Europa?
How about we clean up the great garbage patch in the Pacific Ocean and then let's go. Let's just go. But first, the garbage patch, and that challenges our science completely. It does. It does. Because before we go, we're going to lose all the fish in the world. We've already doomed all the coral in the world. So maybe not so quick. This is not for our generation.
But
We need to pass the torch to the next gen. And they are going to have to pass the torch to the one after that. And 3 generations out, when we can deal with superluminal gravity and propulsion in completely different ways. We got diddly squat. We got stupid ideas from the 50s. We're talking about lasers and nukes and stuff for moving. Come on, that's baby stuff. We're babies. We're babies.
We
And
are
we're not
babies.
ready to go.
In astronomy,
And guess what?
also.
And guess what? This feeds into the politics. We're not going. Because they're not going to give you the money. And Iran's 50 billion is bogus.
Well,
And China's 300 billion is enough
Okay,
to get
there are-
deuterium off the moon.
There are other reasons too. I mean, frankly, at this point, for the next 20 years, I love people's visions, you know, Jerry O'Neill's vision of utopia in Folger's cans in orbit and all that. That's great. Bottom line is, what we discussed, the solar system's a nasty, hostile, horrible place for people. Meatbags don't do well out there. I drive to Barstow a couple times a year on my way to Vegas. Barstow, which is not my favorite place on Earth, is still better than anywhere else off planet because we're evolved to be there. So for the next 20, 30 years, regardless of what Musk or NASA, the Chinese, or anybody does, if we go to Mars and the moon, we're living inside cans, below the ground, with no views, no windows. If you do go outside, you're in another spacesuit, another spacecraft called a spacesuit. You don't get to touch flowers, you don't get to breathe the air. So it's going to be for a special breed of people.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying we shouldn't go. I think it's really important, especially for science. But this conceit of a plan B for human beings when they're
Ridiculous. It's stupid.
No,
And
you're
it's
better
not-
off underground or in the
It's
ocean.
not only ridiculous, in my view, it's extraordinarily immoral.
And dangerous.
It's wrong.
Because it gives us an out.
It's wrong. There is no out. Clean up the goddamn garbage patch. Take the nukes off this planet, and we can discuss them later. So, thanks. Your questions, please.
yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. Oops, I just want to make a point off that. The one thing that we don't know, that's a total unknown, when they talk about intelligent life in outer space, the reason it's so hard to figure out what's going on with that is because we only have one species to draw any conclusions from, which is our own. We're the only technologically intelligent species in the way that we make machines and do science. And we have no idea what the shelf life of our species is. I mean, we've been around as Homo sapiens for a very short time comparatively. So in terms of talking about will we be around in 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, 1 billion years, woof, you know, I mean, the miraculously we've managed so far not to blow ourselves up with atom bombs and hydrogen
And
bombs.
that's only been 75 years.
Right, exactly.
We have plenty of opportunity to blow ourselves away.
But I think that we are an exploratory species. We have always been an exploratory species. You know, always looking over what's over the horizon. And our curiosity is a great strength of our species, and that's, for me, going out in space isn't about, well, okay, we'll have a spare planet. It's about, like, that's our healthiest urge, to go out into space to find out what's there. I love the fact that Elon Musk is not going out into space for economics reasons. He's going out because he just wants to go to Mars. He'd be like just Ray Bradbury wanted to go to Mars.
He can afford to go to Mars.
He wants to die
Go ahead.
on Mars.
Please, your
He wants
question.
to be the human being dying on Mars, right?
Good
Am
for
I
you.
wrong?
He's like all those
So,
timeline.
If you're really not, no, here we go.
The
Let her
first
go.
one to die.
What's your question?
Hey!
Hey, come on, give it to us.
How are you all doing? I am inspired also by the science fiction that is very positive view of our future. That focuses more on humanity's capacity for kindness
Yes.
and innovation and intelligence rather than on humanity's capacity for aggression and fear.
Exactly.
But I see a great deal of stories.
They shouldn't be science fiction, it should be reality today.
It's
Really.
becoming
This is,
reality.
our
It is.
duty as a human being.
And so
Kindness
the
and
question
respect.
I have is in regard to AI, where there's a great deal of both news stories and also fictional stories that paint a picture that is a horrifying or frightening
I'll
one.
repeat it, I'll
Oh,
repeat it.
We'll repeat the
Regarding
question.
AI, I'll repeat it, go ahead.
okay. It's in regard to AI, and
The
for those
dangers.
of you who are inspired by the positive stories, potentially of our future, what is your positive view of our relationship alongside AI in the future?
Oh, well, I think it's very foolish that we haven't put Asimov's 3 laws of robotics into every AI, because they are not prescribed at all from harming humans, and that's very risky, and particularly when they're building robots to create war and so forth. I mean, it's a razor blade, but but then there's the positive things like computing speed and all of that. So it's a double-edged sword.
The answer is, it would be wonderful if somebody would write an opera or a great novel, a neuromancer that showed an AI that was not hostile, or was, co-created in a beautiful way with but
Aurora, like
we,
Stanley Robinson. In the book Aurora, like in Stanley Robinson, the ship becomes a character as this ship is hurtling for 300 years. It's been hurtling toward a star because some idiots in the past wanted to go to space.
Right.
So they sent all these people into the hollowed out asteroid with all the biomes of Earth. They shoot in space, and the ship at some point becomes aware because one of
Yes.
the characters asks them and says, "Can you please write history of the 300 years of the ship?" And the ship says, "Error cannot compute on non-probability." And the character says, "I don't care. Write me a history. Narrativize our past. We're done with this." But there's these great chapters about the AI talking to itself, learning about language, learning about contradictions, and then it comes to find that it is the sole protector of these people who are breaking down, right? Because their ecosystem is breaking down. It's a metaphor for Earth as well, and it helps out. It does crowd control in certain scenes and stuff. It's very. I don't want to say anymore because it's great.
Aurora,
Yeah, but
Like,
Aurora?
it's slipped under the radar. Kim
Yeah.
Robinson's Aurora is one, and then there should be more, right? This
Well,
one comes to mind.
and one thing I want to mention in Space Command is Doug Jones does play a synthetic human, and my idea was to have him be more compassionate than most humans, because he isn't wired with all of the fight or flight things that humans were wired for, back when we were in trees. And so he's able to look at humanity with a very unbiased viewpoint and a compassionate one. So I found that very, very fun to write.
thank you for that. That's great. One last question.
I'm sorry, I've got a follow-up from the last
Please.
panel. Okay, so this idea of scientific depiction in popular media, in films, you guys have been geeking out about the Martian since the last panel. Outside of the Martian, where can I point my students to accurate depictions of science? And Mark, maybe can you speak on the give and take on scientific accuracy
Yes.
versus
Sure.
the length of time you have to tell a story?
I think, again,
Please repeat the question.
his question is, can you point him to accurate depictions of science in like TV, film, so forth? I mean, basically our first priority, of course, is to entertain and engage, but then to inspire if we can. And, but certainly Star Trek is very, very interesting in terms of its extrapolation. 2001: A Space Odyssey is very, very interesting. So I find Solaris, the Russian film and the novel, very interesting. What I do on Mr. Sci-Fi is I put everything in context. It's like this led to this, this led to this. So I'm talking about Ray Bradbury and Arthur C. Clarke and Herman Oberth and Billy Lay and Robert Goddard and all those guys, because when you start to make the connective tissue and show where, then people start reading Bradbury and Heinlein and so forth and see where we came from, and they find their inspirations in those ways. So But I'm creating science fiction that's doing that too, and so I take personal responsibility for that in my own writing.
The sort of creator of The Expanse, Naren Shankar,
Yes.
has a PhD from Cornell in applied physics and electrical engineering, and he's tried to infuse some, more accurate depictions of science and engineering into his series.
As did the novels.
It's a tough time. I mean, this is a dystopian time, as you all know. We got Walking Dead because we could have Walking Dead in a bad afternoon with, launch online. And visions cycle. They change. And more positive visions of what, I mean, it's great that we have all of these enthusiasts. These people, every one of these people have committed their life to expanding a positive vision of science and technology. And for this, I thank Fiorella, Mark, Nadine,
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. And please, there is some food. That's